They have to be part of the chorus here. And we're missing a couple for being sick or for other reasons, but we have two songs for you. The first one, Built on the Rock, the Church Shall Stand. And contributors to this piece are some of the more common names, Scandinavian hymn contributors around Sverdrup's time. I put them on the board. Nikolai Grutvig and then and during our song fest we'll be singing a couple other songs related that they have contributed to. So Built on the Rock is the first song.
Built on the rock, the church doth stand, even when steeples are falling. Crumbled have spires in every land, bells still are chiming and calling, calling the young and old to rest. But above all the soul's distress, longing for rest everlasting. Surely in temples made with hands, God the Most High is not dwelling. High above earth His temple stands, all earthly temples excelling. Yet He whom hands cannot contain chose to abide on earth with men, built in our bodies His temple. We are God's house of living stones, builded for His habitation. He through baptismal grace us owns, heirs of His wondrous salvation. Were we but to His name to tell, yet He would deign with us to dwell, with all His grace and His kingdom.
And our second piece, I don't think has anything to do with Scandinavia or history in that sense as we're gathered here today, but as we look back at history, we're reminded of God's faithfulness, both throughout past and also in our lives today.
Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not thy compassion.
We want to thank the men for singing, and I just so appreciate the beards. So in keeping, and maybe I noticed there were only 3 that didn't have beards, and perhaps if their director were to grow one, maybe that's another story. We're just so happy to have Pastor Phil Formo here today. You know, those of us in the Sverdrup Society are so absolutely indebted to the man, his grandfather, that he wrote about here, Andreas Helland. There is just this amazing, I know that many of you are familiar with Dr. James Hamry, who did so much writing about Sverdrup, and his comments over and over again. What would have happened had there not been Andreas Helland to have collected his work, published them, and then also wrote the other things too, including the biography and finally in English. And I think for some of us who've been working close with this through the years, the strange thing is the realization, and I think it was Dr. Brogdon here that mentioned this to me, how could a man do what Andreas Helland did? How could a man, full-time professor at Augsburg, several children, had a wife that passed away, and then another, married other women along the line. I shouldn't put it that way, but it is true. But I mean, in the midst of all this, is teaching, raising a family, he's turning around and collecting 6 volumes, over 2,200 pages of the writings of this man, Sverdrup, editing them. And as Pastor August has said too, not once has he come across a typo. This is all done in the days of the old typewriter. And you start thinking about that. How could this guy do that? Have the time to do that? Collect them and edit them. Choose which ones were the ones, what order they should be in. And of course, it took us a long time to figure this out. Some of us dummies did not follow. Why did he number them sequentially up to 85, 1 to 85? Why did he do it? Purely and simply based on the scriptural text, starting with Genesis up through the New Testament. Just went right down the line in a perfect order. But I mean, all of these things, and then he wrote the biography. He wrote a 450-page history of Augsburg Seminary. I mean, all of this. And then he learned English so well that by 1947, when he wrote the biography, it's beautifully done. The only problem is so many of those early things were kept in the vernacular of the Norwegian, and that's what we're trying to translate. So we are so indebted to the work of your grandfather. And so at this time, we want to call on Pastor Phil Formo. He is, as you can see in the back, he's a graduate of Pacific Lutheran University, St. Cloud State, and was a teacher in Minneapolis before he became a pastor and going through it himself. Pastor Formo.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate very, very much being invited. I've had an awful lot of fun since I published this book at Sons of Norway's and a whole variety of Norwegian events, as well as a lot of churches with adult education. So it's been wonderful. What I'd like to do this morning or this afternoon is simply begin by saying next to Jesus, his mother, his father, recent love interest Clara Rockney from Harmony, Minnesota. There was no one more that my grandfather respected than Georg Sverdrup. Following my retirement from full-time ministry in St. Luke's in Bloomington in 2011, I set out to write a creative memoir. All the facts are correct. But of course, the conversations, the journal entries, and the letters are a figment of my imagination. After studying his memoir, he protested when he was asked to write a memoir. He said, memoirs are written by people who have too big of egos and they don't have enough to do. So, it took a long time to be convinced to write his own memoir, which finally was intended for family only. which means he's twirling in the grave right now as I talk. I'd like to begin with just a couple of sections from my book that talk about Sverdrup, and then I am going to share some short snippets from his memoir that talk of his experience at Augsburg. I'll first make a confession that I was the first person on both sides of the family not to go to Augsburg. And my father at that point was on the Board of Regents. My brother just graduated from there. And I went west, young man, go west. And so I went to Pacific Lutheran. But years later, I walked into an Augsburg Concordia basketball game at Augsburg. And the person in charge of the alum said, "We missed you at the dinner. You're supposed to be at the dinner." I said, "Don't you remember? I'm not an alum." "Oh, that doesn't matter." So anyway, friendly people. So this is fall of 1890. Arriving 2 weeks into the semester, Andreas had a lot of catching up to do. First thing Monday morning, Andreas presented himself to the president, Georg Sverdrup. As he knocked on the office door, he thought of his first visit to Pastor Ofterdal's office in Stavanger as a nervous 14-year-old. Now 6 years older, some of those feelings returned. "Come in," the president called in a deep, confident voice. Standing in an open doorway, the young man introduced himself. "Professor Sverdrup, I'm Andreas Helland." "Oh, yes, you have finally arrived," said the older man, a smile crossing his face. "I was delayed while teaching parochial school in Harmony," Andreas explained. Yes, that'll do. "Welcome. I was told there was a rooming problem. Has that been settled?" "Yes, that has been settled. It all worked out just fine." "I actually met with you when I was a student at the Cathedral School in Stavanger. Perhaps 4 or 5 years ago," Andreas said. "Oh, yes. I was visiting there in '86. "That must have been the time," the professor answered. "I am wondering if you could give me a list of texts I will need to purchase as I begin class," Andreas inquired. The professor bit his lip, looked up at the new student, and with serious tone replied, "Yes, I will give you some titles, but I must remind you that our primary text is God's own word. These other books are secondary. Oh, I know that from your application, that you have just finished Latin school at the University in Oslo. No doubt you're used to many scholarly textbooks. But let me say it again. Our primary text is God's word, and God's word alone." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Professor Sverdrup ended the conversation by instructing Andreas where the class was being held. The next day, Andreas received a note asking him to visit the president's office. The young student wondered what kind of trouble he might have already gotten himself into. But once in Sverdrup's office, the president kindly offered him the position of teaching history to the preparatory class. The pay was 50 cents per week. It certainly helped toward the weekly room and board cost of $1.19. The dormitory was the setting for serious theological debates. Almost every evening, in one room or another, as many as 72 seminary students were in attendance, representing 3 different Lutheran groups. One group, the conference, was a collective body of individual churches. The conference operated other seminaries, Augsburg being its oldest. Other Augsburg students came from the small Norwegian Augustine Synod. Well, still others made their way to Augsburg from the anti-Missourian Brotherhood. So, they first met when Andreas was 16. He started school in the community school on the island of Stewart in the little town of Fitcha. He was very sickly, and he really did not start school until 12. But by the time he was 14, he had finagled an invitation to attend the cathedral school in Sverdrup. So he left home at 14, only to return to spend summers during his education. Once, as I said, he was done with the cathedral school. He went to Latin school, which was the university in Oslo. And then, in 1889, he decided that he needed to decide what God had for plans for him. So he returned to Fitjar to discover those plans. One thing he was not going to do, and that was catch what was called American fever. All of these people were leaving Norway to come to the United States. In fact, do you know that only Ireland, percentage-wise, lost more people to the United States than Norway? And you can imagine the state church in Norway not allowing their pastors to come over. They had invested in all their education. They didn't see America as a mission field, as it might be today. Instead, they knew they were losing labor. So they were not going to allow them. Well, lo and behold, he went to fetch water for his mother. Sitting on a rock, he heard a voice. Go to America. Now, the only thing that really convinced him to go was his brother Peter, a year earlier, had come to Racine, Wisconsin to serve as pastor of Bethesda Lutheran Church. But just prior to leaving Norway, he received a letter saying his brother had died. Now, if you want to know how, or the strange circumstances, you're going to have to buy the book. I'm not telling you. Any proceeds from this book go to a scholarship in his memory that I set up at Augsburg. I figured after 40 years teaching New Testament at a school, maybe there should be a scholarship in honor of him. So his brother mysteriously dies. Now, I'm going to read just a few more passages from this, from my text. Oh, thank you very much. If I bend down. Oh, what great students you have. It is the fall of 1892. It brought a surprise in yet another visit to Professor Sverdrup's office. Andreas wondered what kind of heresy he might be charged with now. Not ever taking the theological disagreements with other students or faculty too seriously, Andreas simply smiled when he thought of the possibilities. He knocked on the professor's door and was invited in. With a warm handshake offered, Andreas was seated. Mr. Helland, Professor Reimsted's very ill. As you know, well, many are suffering from typhoid fever. Others have contracted tuberculosis. I'm wondering if you would be willing to take over Professor Reimsted's teaching load while he recovers. I understand that you will not be able to attend some of your theology classes during this time, but that would be permissible. And so, he begins teaching while he is still a student. So we get to June 1893. Well, so many other seminary graduates were greeting their parents and girlfriends. Andreas went about packing up his room. He He would remain in Minneapolis for the United Church Convention and his ordination. From his professors and the other pastors, he was beginning to understand the differences between those supporting the very authoritative approach to congregational leadership experienced in the traditions of the Norwegian state church and those known as free church advocates, who preferred authority to be kept in the hands of laity and individual congregations. I'm going to then read, as I said, a few passages from his memoir. This was intended for family because of the political and theological deep divisions and fights between free church and state church, all within the Norwegian tradition. The 3 years that I attended the theological department at Augsburg were very difficult, both for the faculty and the students. By the union in 1890, 3 church groups had been united. All of them had been carrying on theological instruction for their future pastors. The conference had the oldest and largest school, Augsburg, the Norwegian Augustana Synod, and the smallest Augustana Seminary. At the Union Convention, all the theological professors had been elected as professors at Augsburg under the new regime, namely Georg Sverdrup and Sven Aftedal. Both Sverdrup and Bachmann used the lecture method so that there only seldom would be room for questions. This was the European method I was talking to some seminarians about at our table over lunch, that there were no questions. You just listened. In those days, we had only one final examination at the close of the 3-year course in theological department. Not yearly, let alone semester examinations. This made the finals so much more important and terrifying. Several of us looked with anxiety forward to the annual convention. Both in my book about the history of Augsburg and my biography of Professor Sverdrup, I have mentioned the deplorable strife in the United Church in those days. In 1893, Convention of the United Church was the first one that I had attended, that my grandfather attended. One day during the convention, both Sverdrup and Aftedal resigned as professors in the service of the United Church. I, like many others, felt very much bewildered. Directly after the afternoon session, I went to Professor Sverdrup and said to him that I did not know whether or not I should present myself for ordination under these circumstances. His answer? You had better use the opportunity when you've got it. It was difficult to say when you will have another. That tells you the chaos of the church in that day. That evening, a meeting was held in the Augsburg chapel by a number of pastors and lay delegates of the minority. It helped considerably to clear the atmosphere. The next evening, June 15, 1893, I was ordained in the evangelical ministry. Professor Sverdrup had for several years suffered a good deal from migraine. They called them sick headaches. But he bore the affliction quietly and patiently. There were not many outside his immediate family who had any idea about it. He was a man who very seldom said no to any request for speaking at different occasions. And if he had once promised, he did his utmost to fulfill that promise. The sudden death of Georg Sverdrup, May 3rd, 1907, had a tremendous influence on Augsburg and the Lutheran Free Church, as well as on the lives of those who closely connected with their activities. This matter has been touched upon in my book, Augsburg Seminary, during 50 years. To me personally, Professor Sverdrup's death meant that I was forced into some new activities besides my regular work at the seminary. There was, he said, a danger, seminary. This is especially with the case of foreign missions, which he was running. One day, Professor Afterdal called me into his office and told me that he desired to talk over the situation with me. There was, he said, a danger of a serious schism, both at Augsburg and the Lutheran Free Church. The reason was that the younger pastors, as well as the students, wanted Professor Ursa for their president, while the older people wanted me to hold the position. I assured them, be much pleased and fully satisfied if Professor Ursa was elected president of Augsburg. As for myself, I would under no circumstance accept the presidency. Now, rumor has it, within the family, the reason was the deep theological fight between Augsburg and Sverdrup, State Church and Free Church. And because of that, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Does that remind you of anything going on in Washington right now? Andreas had attended the 25th and the 50th anniversaries of Augsburg, and now had been asked to write a biography of his hero, mentor, and friend Georg Sverdrup. He had thought about this project for years, but now, as his heart stirred, he thought of it more as a command than some fleeting fanciful thought. But in this typical humility, he simply called it a biographical sketch, not a true biography. The Sverdrup family and Andreas had a passion for mission. The Norwegian Mission Society began in 1847 in Stavanger, Norway, where Georg Sverdrup was born. As a 12-year-old, my grandfather and his father, when the Mission Society had their annual gathering in Fitchuk, their job was to build the stage and build the lectern. And boats came in from all over. Hundreds, if not thousands of people were there for about 4 days, sleeping in people's barns, everywhere you could imagine, for this mission conference. An exciting time, and certainly one that touched his heart and made him consider the ministry long term. Georg Sverdrup was very concerned when my grandfather was ordained. He'd already interviewed for a call in McIntosh, Minnesota, but Professor Sverdrup, his concern was, it's too cold way up north. Because my grandfather had terrible lungs. And, but he served there for 1 year. And then, you'll like this, seminarians, if this happens to you, a missionary comes to speak for the community. And the missionary gets in the buggy and says, Andreas, I hear you're moving. I didn't know I was moving. Where am I moving to? St. Olaf Church in North Minneapolis. I don't know anything about it. He went to the mailbox. There was the letter of call. No interviews, folks. Just a letter of call. And then his attitude was, oh, I've only been out of the seminary for a year. I can't go to the Central Lutheran of Minneapolis, this St. Olaf Church. But he accepted the call. Now, another little bit of insight and warning for seminarians. Just because it's a larger church doesn't mean you're going to be paid much. He was paid less there than he was in Macintosh. And no longer did someone leave milk and meat and vegetables at the front door. So, small churches, good places. In closing, thanks for inviting me. There's certainly, in quoting Georg Sverdrup, there is a divine guidance in everything, even in the American church controversy. Following those words, my grandfather wrote, "May we not also believe, looking at it from this distance, 1947, that there was a divine guidance, even in the controversy of the 90s of the last century." And when you talk about divine guidance, the background of the cover is one of my grandfather's letters that he would type in triplicate form and send to his 3 missionary children in Madagascar, India, and China. Today that typewriter sits on my writing desk as an inspiration to me. I have just returned from Stavanger and from Trondheim. And when people ask how was the experience, I said it was out of body. To worship first in Stavanger, where he had confirmed his faith, well, at the cathedral school. And then the next Sunday, to worship in the cathedral in Trondheim, where in 1914, representing the Lutheran Free Church, he was given first-class ticket on the American-Norwegian line, along with 3 other church representatives of other bodies, to go to Norway to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Constitution Day. He went up to Trondheim, where the hosting was the Norwegian national anthem, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," and the American national anthem, all woven together. And he described it as saying, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. When I was there about 3 weeks ago, I tell you, the men and boys chorus that was singing and the acoustics are unbelievable. So, thank you very, very much. Any questions, quickly? I don't want to take up any more of your time.
Just a quick
Yes.
one. You said that after Sverdrup died, Urset and he were in the mix.
Yeah.
Well, that was resolved to go to up and out. So what?
Yeah, but they were in the mix of the
Oh, the
students.
students, yes.
The
of course,
students
of
wanted
course.
2 different, right?
So,
Yeah.
the memoir
Yes,
that you referred to,
Yes.
yes.
is it still?
It is here.
But
I'm sorry, his memoir, yes.
Is
Spiral.
it still just in the family?
Yeah.
Is it just handwritten?
Yeah. No, it's typed.
It's typed.
His granddaughter typed it home.
How
And
long
his
is it?
daughter.
How long is it?
It is about 120 pages, single spaced, written in Spanish.
How many copies are there?
I know of one.
You have one.
I think I know of a cousin who has one.
Not three.
No. Well, there might be 3. It was news to me before. Now, and just one other small world and God leading and all of this. So, as a gift for retiring, my wife said, go anywhere in the world and take a writing course because she knows how much I love to take writing courses. Whether it's the Loft, Iowa City, or University of Wisconsin. That was my continuing ed all the time during ministry, was going to take writing classes. I highly recommend it. But you have to understand that when you're preaching, you are writing for speaking. When you are writing, you're writing for writing and to be read, and they're 2 different things completely. But the teacher, one of the 2 Oxford-trained teachers I had in the county of Shropshire, next to Wales, was had just finished his first novel about his grandfather, who was a Methodist roaming preacher in Cornwall. And so he had then became my professor for a week as a study. It was a small world. Wonderful. Thank you very much.